Hello friends, welcome. In this episode, I'll be accompanying you to Sleep with Notes from Underground. Lie down in bed and close your eyes. Listen to the silent screams of an underground mind, far away from the light of society. At that time I was only 24.
My life was even then gloomy, ill-regulated, and as solitary as that of a savage.
I made friends with no one and positively avoided talking, and buried myself more and more in my hole.
At work in the office I never looked at anyone, and was perfectly well aware that my companions looked upon me, not only as a queer fellow, but even looked upon me. I always fancied this, with a sort of loathing.
I sometimes wondered why it was that nobody except me fancied that he was looked upon with aversion.
One of the clerks had a most repulsive, pock-marked face, which looked positively villainous.
I believe I should not have dared to look at anyone with such an unsightly countenance.
Another had such a very dirty old uniform that there was an unpleasant odor in his proximity.
Yet not one of these gentlemen showed the slightest self-consciousness, either about their clothes or their countenance or their character in any way.
Neither of them ever imagined that they were looked at with repulsion. If they had imagined it, they would not have minded, so long as their superiors did not look at them in that way.
It is clear to me now that, owing to my unbounded vanity and to the high standard I set for myself, I often looked at myself with furious discontent, which verged on loathing, and so I inwardly attributed the same feeling to everyone.
I hated my face, for instance.
I thought it disgusting, and even suspected that there was something base in my expression, and so every day when I turned up at the office I tried to behave as independently as possible, and to assume a lofty expression, so that I might not be suspected of being abject.
My face may be ugly, I thought, but let it be lofty, expressive, and above all extremely intelligent. But I was positively and painfully certain that it was impossible for my countenance ever to express those qualities.
And what was worst of all, I thought it actually stupid-looking, and I would have been quite satisfied if I could have looked intelligent.
In fact, I would even have put up with looking base if, at the same time, my face could have been thought strikingly intelligent.
Of course, I hated my fellow clerks one and all, and I despised them all, yet at the same time I was, as it were, afraid of them.
In fact, it happened at times that I thought more highly of them than of myself.
It somehow happened quite suddenly that I alternated between despising them and thinking them superior to myself.
A cultivated and decent man cannot be vain without setting a fearfully high standard for himself, and without despising and almost hating himself at certain moments.
But whether I despised them or thought them superior, I dropped my eyes almost every time I met anyone.
I even made experiments whether I could face so-and-so's looking at me, and I was always the first to drop my eyes.
This worried me to distraction.
I had a sickly dread, too, of being ridiculous, and so had a slavish passion for the conventional and everything external.
I loved to fall into the common rut, and had a wholehearted terror of any kind of eccentricity in myself.
But how could I live up to it?
I was morbidly sensitive, as a man of our age should be.
They were all stupid and as like one another as so many sheep.
Perhaps I was the only one in the office who fancied that I was a coward and a slave, and I fancied it just because I was more highly developed.
But it was not only that I fancied it, it really was so.
I was a coward and a slave. I say this without the slightest embarrassment.
Every decent man of our age must be a coward and a slave.
That is his normal condition.
Of that I am firmly persuaded.
He is made and constructed to that very end.
And not only at the present time owing to some casual circumstances, but always at all times a decent man is bound to be a coward and a slave.
It is the law of nature for all decent people all over the earth.
If any one of them happens to be valiant about something, he need not be comforted nor carried away by that. He would show the white feather just the same before something else.
That is how it invariably and inevitably ends.
Only donkeys and mules are valiant, and they only till they are pushed up to the wall.
It is not worth while to pay attention to them, for they really are of no consequence.
Another circumstance, too, worried me in those days, that there was no one like me and I was unlike anyone else.
I am alone and they are everyone, I thought and pondered.
From that, it is evident that I was still a youngster.
The very opposite sometimes happened.
It was loathsome sometimes to go to the office. Things reached such a point that I often came home ill.
But all at once, apropos of nothing, there would come a phase of skepticism and indifference, and I would laugh myself at my intolerance and fastidiousness. I would reproach myself with being romantic.
At one time I was unwilling to speak to anyone, while at other times I would not only talk, but go to the length of contemplating making friends with them.
All my fastidiousness would suddenly, for no rhyme or reason, vanish.
Who knows, perhaps I never had really had it, and it had simply been affected and got out of books.
I have not decided that question even now.
Once I quite made friends with them, visited their homes, played preference, drank vodka, talked of promotions.
But here let me make a digression.
We Russians, speaking generally, have never had those foolish transcendental romantics, German and still more French, on whom nothing produces any effect.
If there were an earthquake,
If all France perished at the barricades, they would still be the same. They would not even have the decency to effect a change, but would still go on singing their transcendental songs to the hour of their death, because they are fools.
we in Russia have no fools. That is well known.
That is what distinguishes us from foreign lands.
Consequently, these transcendental natures are not found amongst us in their pure form.
The idea that they are is due to our realistic journalists and critics of that day, always on the lookout for Konstanz and Uncle Pyotr Ivanich's and foolishly accepting them as our ideal.
They have slandered our romantics, taking them for the same transcendental sort as in Germany or France.
On the contrary, the characteristics of our romantics are absolutely and directly opposed to the transcendental European type, and no European standard can be applied to them.
Allow me to make use of this word, romantic, an old-fashioned and much respected word which has done good service and is familiar to all.
The characteristics of our romantic are to understand everything, to see everything and to see it often incomparably more clearly than our most realistic minds see it.
To refuse to accept anyone or anything, but at the same time not to despise anything.
To give way, to yield from policy.
Never to lose sight of a useful practical object, such as rent-free quarters at the government expense.
Pensions, decorations, to keep their eye on that object through all the enthusiasms and volumes of lyrical poems.
And at the same time to preserve the sublime and the beautiful inviolate within them to the hour of their death.
And to preserve themselves also, incidentally, like some precious jewel wrapped in cotton wool, if only for the benefit of the sublime and the beautiful.
Our romantic is a man of great breadth and the greatest rogue of all our rogues, I assure you.
I can assure you from experience, indeed.
Of course, that is, if he is intelligent.
But what am I saying? The romantic is always intelligent.
And I only meant to observe that although we have had foolish romantics, they don't count.
And they were only so because in the flower of their youth they degenerated into Germans, and to preserve their precious jewel more comfortably, settled somewhere out there, by preference in Weimar or the Black Forest.
I, for instance, genuinely despised my official work and did not openly abuse it simply because I was in it myself and got a salary for it.
Anyway, take note, I did not openly abuse it.
Our romantic would rather go out of his mind, a thing, however, which very rarely happens, than take to open abuse, unless he had some other career in view, and he is never kicked out.
At most, they would take him to the lunatic asylum as the King of Spain if he should go very mad.
But it is only the thin, fair people who go out of their minds in Russia.
Innumerable romantics attain later in life to considerable rank in the service.
Their many-sidedness is remarkable.
And what a faculty they have for the most contradictory sensations.
I was comforted by this thought even in those days, and I am of the same opinion now.
That is why there are so many broad natures among us who never lose their ideal even in the depths of degradation.
And though they never stir a finger for their ideal, though they are errant thieves and knaves, yet they tearfully cherish their first ideal, and are extraordinarily honest at heart.
Yes, it is only among us that the most incorrigible rogue can be absolutely and loftily honest at heart without in the least ceasing to be a rogue.
I repeat, our romantics, frequently, become such accomplished rascals, suddenly display such a sense of reality and practical knowledge that their bewildered superiors and the public generally can only ejaculate in amazement.
Their many-sidedness is really amazing, and goodness knows what it may develop into later on and what the future has in store for us.
It is not a poor material. I do not say this from any foolish or boastful patriotism.
But I feel sure that you are again imagining that I am joking.
Or perhaps it's just the contrary and you are convinced that I really think so.
Anyway, gentlemen, I shall welcome both views as an honor and a special favor.
And do forgive my digression.
I did not, of course, maintain friendly relations with my comrades and soon was at loggerheads with them, and in my youth and inexperience I even gave up bowing to them, as though I had cut off all relations.
That, however, only happened to me once.
As a rule, I was always alone.
In the first place, I spent most of my time at home, reading.
I tried to stifle all that was continually seething within me by means of external impressions.
And the only external means I had was reading.
Reading, of course, was a great help, exciting me, giving me pleasure and pain.
But at times it bored me fearfully.
One longed for movement in spite of everything, and I plunged all at once into dark, underground, loathsome vice of the pettiest kind.
My wretched passions were acute, smarting. From my continual, sickly irritability I had hysterical impulses, with tears and convulsions.
I had no resource except reading, that is, there was nothing in my surroundings which I could respect and which attracted me. I was overwhelmed with depression, too. I had an hysterical craving for incongruity and for contrast, and so I took to vice.
I have not said all this to justify myself.
But no, I am lying. I did want to justify myself.
I make that little observation for my own benefit, gentlemen.
I don't want to lie. I vowed to myself I would not.
And so, furtively, timidly, in solitude, at night, I indulged in filthy vice, with a feeling of shame which never deserted me, even at the most loathsome moments, and which at such moments nearly made me curse.
Already even then I had my underground world in my soul.
I was fearfully afraid of being seen, of being met, of being recognized.
I visited various obscure haunts.
One night as I was passing a tavern I saw through a lighted window some gentlemen fighting with billiard cues, and saw one of them thrown out of the window.
At other times I should have felt very much disgusted, but I was in such a mood at the time that I actually envied the gentleman thrown out of the window, and I envied him so much that I even went into the tavern and into the billiard room.
Perhaps, I thought, I'll have a fight too, and they'll throw me out of the window.
I was not drunk, but what is one to do? Depression will drive a man to such a pitch of hysteria.
But nothing happened. It seemed that I was not even equal to being thrown out of the window, and I went away without having my fight.
An officer put me in my place from the first moment.
I was standing by the billiard table, and in my ignorance blocking up the way, and he wanted to pass.
He took me by the shoulders and without a word, without a warning or explanation, moved me from where I was standing to another spot and passed by as though he had not noticed me.
I could have forgiven blows, but I could not forgive his having moved me without noticing me. Devil knows what I would have given for a real regular quarrel, a more decent, a more literary one, so to speak.
I had been treated like a fly.
This officer was over 6 foot, while I was a spindly little fellow.
But the quarrel was in my hands.
I had only to protest, and I certainly would have been thrown out of the window.
But I changed my mind and preferred to beat a resentful retreat.
I went out of the tavern straight home,
confused and troubled, and the next night I went out again with the same lewd intentions, still more furtively, abjectly, and miserably than before, as it were, with tears in my eyes, but still I did go out again.
Don't imagine, though, it was cowardice made me slink away from the officer. I never have been a coward at heart, though I have always been a coward in action.
Don't be in a hurry to laugh. I assure you I can explain it all.
Oh, if only that officer had been one of the sort who would consent to fight a duel.
But no, he was one of those gentlemen who preferred fighting with cues or, like Gogol's Lieutenant Paragov, appealing to the police.
They did not fight duels and would have thought a duel with a civilian like me an utterly unseemly procedure in any case, and they looked upon the duel altogether as something impossible, something free-thinking and French.
But they were quite ready to bully, especially when they were over 6 foot.
I did not slink away through cowardice, but through an unbounded vanity.
I was afraid not of his 6 foot, not of getting a sound thrashing and being thrown out of the window. I should have had physical courage enough, I assure you, but I had not the moral courage.
What I was afraid of was that everyone present, from the insolent marker down to the lowest little stinking, pimply clerk in a greasy collar, would jeer at me and fail to understand when I began to protest and to address them in literary language.
For of the point of honor, not of honor, but of the point of honor, one cannot speak among us except in literary language.
You can't allude to the point of honor in ordinary language.
I was fully convinced, the sense of reality, in spite of all my romanticism,
That they would all simply split their sides with laughter.
and that the officer would not simply beat me, that is, without insulting me, but would certainly prod me in the back with his knee, kick me round the billiard table, and only then perhaps have pity and drop me out of the window.
Of course, this trivial incident could not with me end in that.
I often met that officer afterwards in the street and noticed him very carefully.
I am not quite sure whether he recognized me, I imagine not. I judge from certain signs.
But I stared at him with spite and hatred, and so it went on.
For several years. My resentment grew even deeper with years.
At first I began making stealthy inquiries about this officer,
It was difficult for me to do so, for I knew no one.
but one day I heard someone shout his surname in the street as I was following him at a distance, as though I were tied to him, and so I learnt his surname.
Another time I followed him to his flat, and for 10 kopecks learned from the porter where he lived, on which story, whether he lived alone or with others, and so on, in fact, everything one could learn from a porter.
One morning, though I had never tried my hand with the pen, it suddenly occurred to me to write a satire on this officer in the form of a novel which would unmask his villainy.
I wrote the novel with relish.
I did unmask his villainy, I even exaggerated it. At first I so altered his surname that it could easily be recognized, but on second thoughts I changed it, and sent the story to the Otechesvenia Zapiski.
But at that time such attacks were not the fashion, and my story was not printed.
That was a great vexation to me. Sometimes I was positively choked with resentment.
At last I determined to challenge my enemy to a duel.
I composed a splendid, charming letter to him, imploring him to apologize to me, and hinting rather plainly at a duel in case of refusal.
The letter was so composed that if the officer had had the least understanding of the sublime and the beautiful, he would certainly have flung himself on my neck and have offered me his friendship.
And how fine that would have been!
How we should have got on together!
He could have shielded me with his higher rank, while I could have improved his mind with my culture and, well, my ideas, and all sorts of things might have happened.
Only fancy, this was 2 years after his insult to me, and my challenge would have been a ridiculous anachronism, in spite of all the ingenuity of my letter in disguising and explaining away the anachronism.
But, thank God, I did not send the letter to him.
Cold shivers run down my back when I think of what might have happened if I had sent it.
And all at once I revenged myself in the simplest way by a stroke of genius.
A brilliant thought suddenly dawned upon me. Sometimes on holidays I used to stroll along the sunny side of the Nevsky about 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Though it was hardly a stroll so much as a series of innumerable miseries, humiliations, and resentments, but no doubt that was just what I wanted.
I used to wriggle along in a most unseemly fashion, like an eel, continually moving aside to make way for generals, for officers of the guards and the hussars, or for ladies.
At such minutes there used to be a convulsive twinge at my heart, and I used to feel hot all down my back at the mere thought of the wretchedness of my attire, of the wretchedness and abjectness of my little scurrying figure.
This was a regular martyrdom.
A continual, intolerable humiliation at the thought,
which passed into an incessant and direct sensation.
that I was a mere fly in the eyes of all this world.
A nasty, disgusting fly, more intelligent, more highly developed, more refined in feeling than any of them, of course, but a fly that was continually making way for everyone, insulted and injured by everyone.
Why I inflicted this torture upon myself, why I went to the Nevsky, I don't know.
I felt simply drawn there at every possible opportunity.
Already then I began to experience a rush of the enjoyment of which I spoke in the first chapter.
After my affair with the officer, I felt even more drawn there than before. It was on the Nevsky that I met him most frequently, there I could admire him.
He too went there chiefly on holidays. He too turned out of his path for generals and persons of high rank, and he too wriggled between them like an eel.
But people like me, or even better dressed than me, he simply walked over. He made straight for them as though there was nothing but empty space before him, and never, under any circumstances, turned aside.
I gloated over my resentment watching him, and
always resentfully made way for him.
it exasperated me that even in the street I could not be on an even footing with him.
Why must you invariably be the first to move aside? I kept asking myself in hysterical rage, waking up sometimes at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Why is it you and not he? There's no regulation about it, there's no written law.
Let the making way be equal, as it usually is when refined people meet. He moves halfway and you move halfway. You pass with mutual respect.
But that never happened, and I always moved aside, while he did not even notice my making way for him.
And lo and behold, a bright idea dawned upon me.
What, I thought, if I meet him and don't move on one side?
What if I don't move aside on purpose, even if I knock up against him?
How would that be? This audacious idea took such a hold on me that it gave me no peace.
I was dreaming of it continually, horribly, and I purposely went more frequently to the Nevsky in order to picture more vividly how I should do it when I did do it.
I was delighted. This intention seemed to me more and more practical and possible.
Of course I shall not really push him, I thought, already more good-natured in my joy.
I will simply not turn aside, will run up against him, not very violently, but just shouldering each other, just as much as decency permits. I will push against him just as much as he pushes against me. At last I made up my mind completely.
But my preparations took a great deal of time.
To begin with, when I carried out my plan, I should need to be looking rather more decent, and so I had to think of my get-up.
In case of emergency, if, for instance, there were any sort of public scandal, and the public there is of the most recherché, the Countess walks there.
Prince D walks there, all the literary world is there. I must be well dressed. That inspires respect and of itself puts us on an equal footing in the eyes of the society.
With this object I asked for some of my salary in advance, and bought at Churkin's a pair of black gloves and a decent hat.
Black gloves seemed to me both more dignified and bon ton than the lemon-colored ones which I had contemplated at first.
The color is too gaudy, it looks as though one were trying to be conspicuous, and I did not take the lemon-colored ones.
I had got ready long beforehand a good shirt with white bone studs. My overcoat was the only thing that held me back.
The coat in itself was a very good one, it kept me warm, but it was wadded and it had a raccoon collar which was the height of vulgarity.
I had to change the collar at any sacrifice, and to have a beaver one like an officer's.
For this purpose I began visiting the Gostiny Dvor, and after several attempts I pitched upon a piece of cheap German beaver.
Though these German beavers soon grow shabby and look wretched, yet at first they look exceedingly well, and I only needed it for the occasion.
I asked the price. Even so, it was too expensive.
After thinking it over thoroughly, I decided to sell my raccoon collar.
The rest of the money, a considerable sum for me, I decided to borrow from Anton Antonich Psychologıcal, my immediate superior, an unassuming person, though grave and judicious.
He never lent money to anyone, but I had, on entering the service, been specially recommended to him by an important personage who had got me my berth.
I was horribly worried. To borrow from Anton Antonich seemed to me monstrous and shameful.
I did not sleep for 2 or 3 nights.
Indeed, I did not sleep well at that time. I was in a fever. I had a vague sinking at my heart, or else a sudden throbbing.
Anton Antonich was surprised at first, then he frowned, then he reflected, and did after all lend me the money, receiving from me a written authorization to take from my salary a fortnight later the sum that he had lent me.
In this way everything was at last ready.
The handsome beaver replaced the mean-looking raccoon, and I began by degrees to get to work.
It would never have done to act offhand, at random. The plan had to be carried out skillfully, by degrees.
But I must confess that after many efforts I began to despair. We simply could not run into each other.
I made every preparation. I was quite determined. It seemed as though we should run into one another directly, and before I knew what I was doing I had stepped aside for him again, and he had passed without noticing me.
I even prayed as I approached him that God would grant me determination.
One time I had made up my mind thoroughly, but it ended in my stumbling and falling at his feet, because at the very last instant when I was 6 inches from him my courage failed me.
He very calmly stepped over me while I flew on one side like a ball.
That night I was ill again, feverish and delirious.
And suddenly it ended most happily.
The night before I had made up my mind not to carry out my fatal plan and to abandon it all, and with that object I went to the Nevsky for the last time, just to see how I would abandon it all.
Suddenly, 3 paces from my enemy, I unexpectedly made up my mind. I closed my eyes and we ran full tilt, shoulder to shoulder, against one another.
I did not budge an inch and passed him on a perfectly equal footing.
He did not even look round and pretended not to notice it, but he was only pretending. I am convinced of that.
I am convinced of that to this day.
Of course, I got the worst of it. He was stronger, but that was not the point.
The point was that I had attained my object, I had kept up my dignity, I had not yielded a step, and had put myself publicly on an equal social footing with him.
I returned home feeling that I was fully avenged for everything.
I was delighted. I was triumphant and sang Italian arias.
Of course, I will not describe to you what happened to me 3 days later. If you have read my first chapter, you can guess for yourself.
The officer was afterwards transferred. I have not seen him now for 14 years.
What is the dear fellow doing now?
Whom is he walking over?
But the period of my dissipation would end, and I always felt very sick afterwards.
It was followed by remorse. I tried to drive it away. I felt too sick.
By degrees, however, I grew used to that too.
I grew used to everything, or rather I voluntarily resigned myself to enduring it.
But I had a means of escape that reconciled everything. That was to find refuge in the sublime and the beautiful, in dreams, of course.
I was a terrible dreamer. I would dream for 3 months on end, tucked away in my corner, and you may believe me that at those moments I had no resemblance to the gentleman who, in the perturbation of his chicken heart, put a collar of German beaver on his greatcoat.
I suddenly became a hero. I would not have admitted my 6-foot lieutenant even if he had called on me. I could not even picture him before me then.
What were my dreams and how I could satisfy myself with them, it is hard to say now, but at the time I was satisfied with them.
Though, indeed, even now I am to some extent satisfied with them.
Dreams were particularly sweet and vivid after a spell of dissipation. They came with remorse and with tears, with curses and transports.
There were moments of such positive intoxication, of such happiness, that there was not the faintest trace of irony within me, on my honor.
I had faith, hope, love. I believed blindly at such times that by some miracle, by some external circumstance, all this would suddenly open out, expand.
That suddenly a vista of suitable activity, beneficent,
good, and, above all, ready-made, would rise up before me, and I should come out into the light of day, almost riding a white horse and crowned with laurel.
Anything but the foremost place I could not conceive for myself, and for that very reason I quite contentedly occupied the lowest in reality.
Either to be a hero or to grovel in the mud, there was nothing between.
That was my ruin, for when I was in the mud I comforted myself with the thought that at other times I was a hero, and the hero was a cloak for the mud.
For an ordinary man it was shameful to defile himself, but a hero was too lofty to be utterly defiled, and so he might defile himself.
It is worth noting that these attacks of the sublime and the beautiful visited me even during the period of dissipation and just at the times when I was touching the bottom.
They came in separate spurts, as though reminding me of themselves, but did not banish the dissipation by their appearance.
On the contrary, they seemed to add a zest to it by contrast, and were only sufficiently present to serve as an appetizing sauce.
That sauce was made up of contradictions and sufferings, of agonizing inward analysis, and all these pangs and pinpricks gave a certain piquancy, even a significance to my dissipation, in fact, completely answered the purpose of an appetizing sauce.
There was a certain depth of meaning in it.
And I could hardly have resigned myself to the simple, vulgar, direct debauchery of a clerk, and have endured all the filthiness of it.
What could have allured me about it then, and have drawn me at night into the street?
No, I had a lofty way of getting out of it all.
And what loving kindness, O Lord, what loving kindness I felt at times in those dreams of mine.
In those flights into the sublime and the beautiful.
Though it was fantastic love, though it was never applied to anything human in reality, yet there was so much of this love that one did not feel afterwards even the impulse to apply it in reality. That would have been superfluous.
Everything, however, passed satisfactorily by a lazy and fascinating transition into the sphere of art, that is, into the beautiful forms of life, lying ready, largely stolen from the poets and novelists and adapted to all sorts of needs and uses.
I, for instance, was triumphant over everyone. Everyone, of course, was in dust and ashes, and was forced spontaneously to recognize my superiority, and I forgave them all.
I was a poet and a grand gentleman. I fell in love.
I came in for countless millions and immediately devoted them to humanity.
And at the same time I confessed before all the people my shameful deeds, which, of course, were not merely shameful, but had in them much that was sublime and beautiful, something in the Manfred style.
Everyone would kiss me and weep, while I should go barefoot and hungry preaching new ideas and fighting a victorious Austerlitz against the obscurantists.
Then the band would play a march, an amnesty would be declared, the Pope would agree to retire from Rome to Brazil.
Then there would be a ball for the whole of Italy at the Villa Borghese on the shores of Lake Como, Lake Como being for that purpose transferred to the neighborhood of Rome.
Then would come a scene in the bushes, and so on, as though you did not know all about it?
You will say that it is vulgar and contemptible to drag all this into public after all the tears and transports which I have myself confessed.
But why is it contemptible? Can you imagine that I am ashamed of it all, and that it was stupider than anything in your life, gentlemen?
And I can assure you that some of these fancies were by no means badly composed.
It did not all happen on the shores of Lake Como.
And yet you are right, it really is vulgar and contemptible.
And most contemptible of all it is that now I am attempting to justify myself to you.
And even more contemptible than that is my making this remark now.
But that's enough, or there will be no end to it. Each step will be more contemptible than the last.
I can never stand more than 3 months of dreaming at a time without feeling an irresistible desire to plunge into society.
To plunge into society meant to visit my superior at the office, Anton Antonich Psychologıcal.
He was the only permanent acquaintance I have had in my life, and I wonder at the fact myself now.
But I only went to see him when that phase came over me, and when my dreams had reached such a point of bliss that it became essential at once to embrace my fellows and all mankind.
And for that purpose I needed at least one human being actually existing.
I had to call on Anton Antonich, however, on Tuesday, his at-home day, So I had always to time my passionate desire to embrace humanity so that it might fall on a Tuesday.
This Anton Antonich lived on the fourth story in a house in 5 corners, in 4 low-pitched rooms, one smaller than the other, of a particularly frugal and sallow appearance.
He had 2 daughters and their aunt, who used to pour out the tea.
Of the daughters, one was 13 and another 14. They both had snub noses, and I was awfully shy of them because they were always whispering and giggling together.
The master of the house usually sat in his study on a leather couch in front of the table with some gray-headed gentleman, usually a colleague from our office or some other department.
I never saw more than 2 or 3 visitors there, always the same.
They talked about the excise duty, about business in the Senate, about salaries, about promotions, about His Excellency, and the best means of pleasing him, and so on.
I had the patience to sit like a fool beside these people for 4 hours at a stretch, listening to them without knowing what to say to them or venturing to say a word.
I became stupefied. Several times I felt myself perspiring. I was overcome by a sort of paralysis, but this was pleasant and good for me. On returning home, I deferred for a time my desire to embrace all mankind.
I had, however, one other acquaintance of a sort, Simonov, who was an old schoolfellow.
I had a number of schoolfellows, indeed, in Petersburg, but I did not associate with them, and had even given up nodding to them in the street.
I believe I had transferred into the department I was in simply to avoid their company and to cut off all connection with my hateful childhood.
Curses on that school, and all those terrible years of penal servitude.
In short, I parted from my schoolfellows as soon as I got out into the world.
There were 2 or 3 left to whom I nodded in the street.
One of them was Simonov, who had in no way been distinguished at school, was of a quiet and equable disposition, but I discovered in him a certain independence of character and even honesty. I don't even suppose that he was particularly stupid.
I had at one time spent some rather soulful moments with him, but these had not lasted long and had somehow been suddenly clouded over.
He was evidently uncomfortable at these reminiscences, and was, I fancy, always afraid that I might take up the same tone again.
I suspected that he had an aversion for me, but still I went on going to see him, not being quite certain of it.
And so on one occasion, unable to endure my solitude and knowing that as it was Thursday Anton Antonich's door would be closed, I thought of Simonov.
Climbing up to his 4th story, I was thinking that the man disliked me, and that it was a mistake to go and see him.
But as it always happened that such reflections impelled me, as though purposely, to put myself into a false position, I went in.
It was almost a year since I had last seen Simonov. I found 2 of my old schoolfellows with him.
They seemed to be discussing an important matter.
All of them took scarcely any notice of my entrance, which was strange, for I had not met them for years.
Evidently they looked upon me as something on the level of a common fly.
I had not been treated like that even at school, though they all hated me.
I knew, of course, that they must despise me now for my lack of success in the service, and for my having let myself sink so low, going about badly dressed and so on, which seemed to them a sign of my incapacity and insignificance.
But I had not expected such contempt.
Simonov was positively surprised at my turning up.
Even in old days he had always seemed surprised at my coming.
All this disconcerted me. I sat down, feeling rather miserable, and began listening to what they were saying.
They were engaged in warm and earnest conversation about a farewell dinner which they wanted to arrange for the next day to a comrade of theirs called Zverkov, an officer in the army, who was going away to a distant province.
This Zverkov had been all the time at school with me, too.
I had begun to hate him particularly in the upper forms.
In the lower forms, he had simply been a pretty, playful boy whom everybody liked.
I had hated him, however, even in the lower forms, just because he was a pretty and playful boy.
He was always bad at his lessons and got worse and worse as he went on. However, he left with a good certificate, as he had powerful interests.
During his last year at school he came in for an estate of 200 serfs, and as almost all of us were poor he took up a swaggering tone among us.
He was vulgar in the extreme, but at the same time he was a good-natured fellow, even in his swaggering.
in spite of superficial, fantastic and sham notions of honor and dignity, all but very few of us positively grovelled before Zverkov, and the more so the more he swaggered.
And it was not from any interested motive that they grovelled, but simply because he had been favored by the gifts of nature.
Moreover, it was, as it were, an accepted idea among us that Zverkov was a specialist in regard to tact and the social graces.
This last fact particularly infuriated me.
I hated the abrupt, self-confident tone of his voice, his admiration of his own witticisms, which were often frightfully stupid, though he was bold in his language.
I hated his handsome but stupid face and the free and easy military manners in fashion in the 40s.
I hated the way in which he used to talk of his future conquests of women. He did not venture to begin his attack upon women until he had the epaulets of an officer,
and was looking forward to them with impatience, and boasted of the duels he would constantly be fighting.
I remember how I, invariably so taciturn,
suddenly fastened upon Zverkov,
when one day talking at a leisure moment with his schoolfellows of his future relations with the fair sex,
and growing as sportive as a puppy in the sun.
He all at once declared that he would not leave a single village girl on his estate unnoticed,
that was his droit de seigneur, and that if the peasants dared to protest, he would have them all flogged and double the tax on them, the bearded rascals.
Our servile rabble applauded, but I attacked him, not from compassion for the girls and their fathers, but simply because they were applauding such an insect.
I got the better of him on that occasion, but though Zverkov was stupid, he was lively and impudent, and so laughed it off, and in such a way that my victory was not really complete. The laugh was on his side.
He got the better of me on several occasions afterwards, but without malice, jestingly, casually.
I remained angrily and contemptuously silent and would not answer him.
When we left school he made advances to me. I did not rebuff them, for I was flattered, but we soon parted, and quite naturally.
Afterwards I heard of his baroque-room success as a lieutenant, and of the fast life he was leading.
Then there came other rumors of his successes in the service.
By then he had taken to cutting me in the street, and I suspected that he was afraid of compromising himself by greeting a personage as insignificant as me. I saw him once in the theater, in the third tier of boxes.
By then he was wearing shoulder straps.
He was twisting and twirling about, ingratiating himself with the daughters of an ancient general.
In 3 years he had gone off considerably, though he was still rather handsome and adroit.
One could see that by the time he was 30 he would be corpulent.
So it was to this Zverkov that my schoolfellows were going to give a dinner on his departure.
They had kept up with him for those 3 years, though privately they did not consider themselves on an equal footing with him. I am convinced of that.
Of Semenov's 2 visitors, one was Ferfitchkin,
A Russianized German, a little fellow with the face of a monkey.
a blockhead who was always deriding everyone.
A very bitter enemy of mine from our days in the lower forms, a vulgar, impudent, swaggering fellow, who affected a most sensitive feeling of personal honor, though of course he was a wretched little coward at heart.
He was one of those worshippers of Zverkov who made up to the latter from interested motives, and often borrowed money from him.
Semenov's other visitor, Trudolyubov, was a person in no way remarkable, a tall young fellow in the army with a cold face, fairly honest, though he worshipped success of every sort, and was only capable of thinking of promotion.
He was some sort of distant relation of Zverkov's, and this, foolish as it seems, gave him a certain importance among us.
He always thought me of no consequence whatever. His behavior to me, though not quite courteous, was tolerable.
Well, with 7 rubles each, said Trudolyubov, 21 rubles between the 3 of us, we ought to be able to get a good dinner. Zverkov, of course, won't pay.
Of course not, since we are inviting him, Semenov decided.
Can you imagine? Ferfitchkin interrupted hotly and conceitedly, like some insolent flunky boasting of his master the general's decorations. Can you imagine that Zverkov will let us pay alone?
He will accept from delicacy, but he will order 6 bottles of champagne. Do we want half a dozen for the four of us? Observed Trudolyubov, taking notice only of the half dozen.
So the three of us, with Zverkov for the fourth, 21 rubles, at the Hotel de Paris at 5 o'clock tomorrow, Simonov, who had been asked to make the arrangements, concluded finally.
How 21 rubles? I asked in some agitation with a show of being offended. If you count me, it will not be 21 but 28 rubles.
It seemed to me that to invite myself so suddenly and unexpectedly would be positively graceful, and that they would all be conquered at once and would look at me with respect.
Do you want to join too? Simonov observed, with no appearance of pleasure, seeming to avoid looking at me. He knew me through and through.
It infuriated me that he knew me so thoroughly.
Why not? I am an old schoolfellow of his too, I believe, and I must own I feel hurt that you have left me out, I said, boiling over again.
And where were we to find you? Ferfitchkin put in roughly.
You never were on good terms with Zverkov, Trudolyubov added, frowning.
But I had already clutched at the idea and would not give it up.
It seems to me that no one has a right to form an opinion upon that, I retorted in a shaking voice, as though something tremendous had happened.
Perhaps that is just my reason for wishing it now, that I have not always been on good terms with him. Oh, there's no making you out.
With these refinements, Trudolyubov jeered.
We'll put your name down, Simonov decided, addressing me. Tomorrow at 5 o'clock at the Hotel de Paris.
What about the money? Ferfitchkin began in an undertone, indicating me to Simonov, but he broke off, for even Simonov was embarrassed.
That will do, said Trudolyubov, getting up.
If he wants to come so much, let him. But it's a private thing between us friends, Ferfitchkin said crossly as he too picked up his hat.
It's not an official gathering.
We do not want it all, perhaps. They went away.
Ferfitchkin did not greet me in any way as he went out. Trudolyubov barely nodded.
Simonov, with whom I was left tete-a-tete, was in a state of vexation and perplexity, and looked at me queerly.
He did not sit down and did not ask me to.
Ashem. Yes. Tomorrow then.
Will you pay your subscription now?
I just ask so as to know, he muttered in embarrassment.
I flushed crimson. As I did so I remembered that I had owed Simonov 15 rubles for ages, which I had, indeed, never forgotten, though I had not paid it.
You will understand, Simonov, that I could have no idea when I came here. I am very much vexed that I have forgotten. All right, that doesn't matter.
You can pay tomorrow after the dinner.
I simply wanted to know. Please don't. He broke off and began pacing the room, still more vexed.
As he walked he began to stamp with his heels.
Am I keeping you? I asked, after 2 minutes of silence.
Oh, he said, starting, that is, to be truthful, yes. I have to go and see someone. Not far from here, he added in an apologetic voice, somewhat abashed.
My goodness, why didn't you say so?
I cried, seizing my cap, with an astonishingly free and easy air, which was the last thing I should have expected of myself.
It's close by. Not 2 paces away, Simonov repeated, accompanying me to the front door with a fussy air which did not suit him at all.
So 5 o'clock, punctually tomorrow, he called down the stairs after me. He was very glad to get rid of me. I was in a fury.
What possessed me to force myself upon them? I wondered, grinding my teeth as I strode along the street. For a scoundrel, a pig like that Zverkov. Of course I had better not go. Of course I must just snap my fingers at them.
I am not bound in any way. I'll send Simonov a note by tomorrow's post.
But what made me furious was that I knew for certain that I should go, that I should make a point of going, and the more tactless, the more unseemly my going would be, the more certainly I would go.
And there was a positive obstacle to my going. I had no money.
All I had was 9 rubles. I had to give 7 of that to my servant Apollon for his monthly wages.
That was all I paid him. He had to keep himself.
Not to pay him was impossible, considering his character.
But I will talk about that plague of mine, another time.
However, I knew I should go and should not pay him his wages.
That night I had the most hideous dreams.
No wonder. All the evening I had been oppressed by memories of my miserable days at school, and I could not shake them off.
I was sent to the school by distant relations,
Upon whom I was dependent and of whom I have heard nothing since. They sent me there a forlorn, silent boy, already crushed by their reproaches, already troubled by doubt, and looking with savage distrust at everyone.
My schoolfellows met me with spiteful and merciless jibes because I was not like any of them.
But I could not endure their taunts. I could not give in to them with the ignoble readiness with which they gave in to one another.
I hated them from the first, and shut myself away from everyone in timid, wounded and disproportionate pride.
Their coarseness revolted me. They laughed cynically at my face, at my clumsy figure, and yet what stupid faces they had themselves.
In our school the boys' faces seemed in a special way to degenerate and grow stupider.
How many fine-looking boys came to us?
In a few years they became repulsive.
Even at 16 I wondered at them morosely. Even then I was struck by the pettiness of their thoughts, the stupidity of their pursuits, their games, their conversations.
They had no understanding of such essential things, they took no interest in such striking, impressive subjects, that I could not help considering them inferior to myself.
It was not wounded vanity that drove me to it, and for God's sake do not thrust upon me your hackneyed remarks, repeated to nausea, that I was only a dreamer, while they even then had an understanding of life.
They understood nothing, they had no idea of real life, and I swear that was what made me most indignant with them.
On the contrary, the most obvious, striking reality they accepted with fantastic stupidity, and even at that time were accustomed to respect success.
Everything that was just, but oppressed and looked down upon, they laughed at heartlessly and shamefully.
They took rank for intelligence. Even at 16 they were already talking about a snug berth.
Of course, a great deal of it was due to their stupidity, to the bad examples with which they had always been surrounded in their childhood and boyhood.
They were monstrously depraved.
Of course a great deal of that, too, was superficial and an assumption of cynicism. Of course there were glimpses of youth and freshness even in their depravity, but even that freshness was not attractive, and showed itself in a certain rakishness.
I hated them horribly, though perhaps I was worse than any of them.
They repaid me in the same way, and did not conceal their aversion for me. But by then I did not desire their affection. On the contrary, I continually longed for their humiliation.
To escape from their derision, I purposely began to make all the progress I could with my studies and forced my way to the very top.
This impressed them. Moreover, they all began by degrees to grasp that I had already read books none of them could read, and understood things of which they had not even heard.
They took a savage and sarcastic view of it, but were morally impressed, especially as the teachers began to notice me on those grounds.
The mockery ceased, but the hostility remained, and cold and strained relations became permanent between us.
In the end, I could not put up with it. With years, a craving for society, for friends, developed in me.
I attempted to get on friendly terms with some of my schoolfellows, but somehow or other my intimacy with them was always strained and soon ended of itself.
Once, indeed, I did have a friend.
But I was already a tyrant at heart. I wanted to exercise unbounded sway over him. I tried to instill into him a contempt for his surroundings. I required of him a disdainful and complete break with those surroundings.
I frightened him with my passionate affection. I reduced him to tears, to hysterics.
He was a simple and devoted soul, but when he devoted himself to me entirely I began to hate him immediately and repulsed him, as though all I needed him for was to win a victory over him, to subjugate him and nothing else.
But I could not subjugate all of them. My friend was not at all like them either. He was, in fact, a rare exception.
The first thing I did on leaving school was to give up the special job for which I had been destined so as to break all ties, to curse my past and shake the dust from off my feet.
And goodness knows why, after all that, I should go trudging off to Semenov's.
Early next morning I roused myself and jumped out of bed with excitement, as though it were all about to happen at once.
But I believed that some radical change in my life was coming and would inevitably come that day.
Owing to its rarity, perhaps, any external event, however trivial, always made me feel as though some radical change in my life were at hand.
I went to the office, however, as usual, but sneaked away home 2 hours earlier to get ready.
The great thing, I thought, is not to be the first to arrive, or they will think I am overjoyed at coming.
But there were thousands of such great points to consider, and they all agitated and overwhelmed me.
I polished my boots a second time with my own hands. Nothing in the world would have induced Apollon to clean them twice a day, as he considered that it was more than his duties required of him.
I stole the brushes to clean them from the passage, being careful he should not detect it for fear of his contempt.
Then I minutely examined my clothes and thought that everything looked old, worn and threadbare.
I had let myself get too slovenly.
My uniform, perhaps, was tidy, but I could not go out to dinner in my uniform.
The worst of it was that on the knee of my trousers was a big yellow stain.
I had a foreboding that that stain would deprive me of 9/10 of my personal dignity.
I knew, too, that it was very poor to think so.
But this is no time for thinking. Now I am in for the real thing, I thought, and my heart sank.
I knew, too, perfectly well even then that I was monstrously exaggerating the facts.
But how could I help it? I could not control myself, and was already shaking with fever.
With despair, I pictured to myself how coldly and disdainfully that scoundrel Zverkov would meet me.
With what dull-witted, invincible contempt the blockhead Trudolyubov would look at me.
With what impudent rudeness the insect Furfichkin would snigger at me in order to curry favor with Zverkov.
How completely Semenov would take it all in, and how he would despise me for the abjectness of my vanity and lack of spirit, and worst of all, how paltry, unliterary, commonplace it would all be.
Of course, the best thing would be not to go at all.
But that was most impossible of all. If I feel impelled to do anything, I seem to be pitchforked into it.
I should have jeered at myself ever afterwards. So you funked it, you funked it, you funked the real thing. On the contrary, I passionately longed to show all that rabble that I was by no means such a spiritless creature as I seemed to myself.
What is more, even in the acutest paroxysm of this cowardly fever, I dreamed of getting the upper hand, of dominating them, carrying them away, making them like me, if only for my elevation of thought and unmistakable wit.
They would abandon Zverkov. He would sit on one side, silent and ashamed, while I should crush him.
Then, perhaps, we would be reconciled and drink to our everlasting friendship.
But what was most bitter and humiliating for me was that I knew even then,
Knew fully and for certain, that I needed nothing of all this really, that I did not really want to crush, to subdue, to attract them, and that I did not care a straw really for the result, even if I did achieve it.
oh, how I prayed for the day to pass quickly.
In unutterable anguish I went to the window, opened the movable pane, and looked out into the troubled darkness of the thickly falling wet snow.
At last my wretched little clock hissed out 5.
I seized my hat and, trying not to look at Apollon,
Who had been all day expecting his month's wages,
but in his foolishness was unwilling to be the first to speak about it, I slipped between him and the door and, jumping into a high-class sledge, on which I spent my last half-ruble, I drove up in grand style to the Hotel de Paris. I had been certain the day before that I should be the first to arrive.
but it was not a question of being the first to arrive.
Not only were they not there, but I had difficulty in finding our room.
The table was not laid even. What did it mean? After a good many questions, I elicited from the waiters that the dinner had been ordered not for 5, but for 6 o'clock.
This was confirmed at the buffet too.
I felt really ashamed to go on questioning them.
It was only 25 minutes past 5.
If they changed the dinner hour, they ought at least to have let me know that is what the post is for, and not to have put me in an absurd position in my own eyes. And
even before the waiters, I sat down. The servant began laying the table. I felt even more humiliated when he was present.
Towards 6 o'clock they brought in candles, though there were lamps burning in the room.
It had not occurred to the waiter, however, to bring them in at once when I arrived.
In the next room, two gloomy, angry-looking persons were eating their dinners in silence at two different tables.
There was a great deal of noise, even shouting, in a room further away. One could hear the laughter of a crowd of people, and nasty little shrieks in French. There were ladies at the dinner.
It was sickening, in fact. I rarely passed more unpleasant moments, so much so that when they did arrive all together punctually at 6, I was overjoyed to see them, as though they were my deliverers, and even forgot that it was incumbent upon me to show resentment.
Zverkov walked in at the head of them. Evidently he was the leading spirit.
He and all of them were laughing, but seeing me, Zverkov drew himself up a little, walked up to me deliberately with a slight, rather jaunty bend from the waist.
He shook hands with me in a friendly, but not over-friendly, fashion, with a sort of circumspect courtesy like that of a general, as though in giving me his hand he were warding off something.
I had imagined, on the contrary, that on coming in he would at once break into his habitual thin, shrill laugh and fall to making his insipid jokes and witticisms.
I had been preparing for them ever since the previous day, but I had not expected such condescension, such high official courtesy.
So then, he felt himself ineffably superior to me in every respect.
If he only meant to insult me by that high official tone, it would not matter, I thought. I could pay him back for it one way or another.
But what if, in reality, without the least desire to be offensive, that Sheepshead had a notion in earnest that he was superior to me and could only look at me in a patronizing way?
The very supposition made me gasp.
I was surprised to hear of your desire to join us, he began, lisping and drawling, which was something new.
You and I seem to have seen nothing of one another. You fight shy of us. You shouldn't.
We are not such terrible people as you think.
Well, anyway, I am glad to renew our acquaintance.
And he turned carelessly to put down his hat on the window.
Have you been waiting long? Trudolyubov inquired.
I arrived at 5 o'clock as you told me yesterday, I answered aloud, with an irritability that threatened an explosion.
Didn't you let him know that we had changed the hour?
Said Trudolyubov to Simonov.
No, I didn't. I forgot, the latter replied, with no sign of regret, and without even apologizing to me, he went off to order the hors d'oeuvre.
So you've been here a whole hour?
Oh, poor fellow! Zverkov cried ironically, for to his notions this was bound to be extremely funny.
That rascal Ferfitchkin followed with his nasty little snigger like a puppy yapping.
My position struck him, too, as exquisitely ludicrous and embarrassing.
It isn't funny at all, I cried to Ferfitchkin, more and more irritated.
It wasn't my fault, but other people's.
They neglected to let me know.
It was simply absurd.
It's not only absurd, but something else as well, muttered Trudolyubov, naively taking my part.
You are not hard enough upon it. It was simply rudeness, unintentional, of course. And how could Simonov? Hashem!
If a trick like that had been played on me, observed Ferfitchkin, I should. But you should have ordered something for yourself, Zverkov interrupted, or simply asked for dinner without waiting for us.
You will allow that I might have done that without your permission, I rapped out.
If I waited, it was. Let us sit down, gentlemen, cried Simonov, coming in.
Everything is ready. I can't answer for the champagne. It is capitally frozen. You see, I did not know your address. Where was I to look for you? He suddenly turned to me, but again he seemed to avoid looking at me.
Evidently, he had something against me. It must have been what happened yesterday.
All sat down. I did the same.
It was a round table. Trudolyubov was on my left, Simonov on my right, Zverkov was sitting opposite, Ferfitchkin next to him, between him and Trudolyubov.
Tell me, are you in a government office? Zverkov went on attending to me. Seeing that I was embarrassed, he seriously thought that he ought to be friendly to me, and, so to speak, cheer me up.
Does he want me to throw a bottle at his head? I thought in a fury.
In my novel surroundings, I was unnaturally ready to be irritated.
In the N office, I answered jerkily with my eyes on my plate.
And have you a go de birth? I say, what made you leave your original job? What made me was that I wanted to leave my original job. I drawled more than he, hardly able to control myself.
Furfichkin went off into a guffaw.
Semenov looked at me ironically.
Trudolyubov left off eating and began looking at me with curiosity.
Zverkov winced, but he tried not to notice it.
And the remuneration? What remuneration? I mean, you're a salari? Why are you cross-examining me? However, I told him at once what my salary was.
I turned horribly red. It is not very handsome, Zverkov observed majestically.
Yes, you can't afford to dine at cafes on that, Furfichkin added insolently.
To my thinking it's very poor, Trudolyubov observed gravely.
And how thin you have grown. How you have changed, added Zverkov, with a shade of venom in his voice, scanning me and my attire with a sort of insolent compassion.
Oh, spare his blushes, cried Furfichkin, sniggering.
My dear sir, allow me to tell you I am not blushing, I broke out at last. Do you hear? I am dining here at this cafe at my own expense, not at other people's. Note that, Mr. Furfichkin.
What? Isn't everyone here dining at his own expense?
You would seem to be. Furfichkin flew out at me, turning as red as a lobster and looking me in the face with fury.
Thereat, I answered, feeling I had gone too far, and I imagine it would be better to talk of something more intelligent. You intend to show off your intelligence, I suppose? Don't disturb yourself, that would be quite out of place here.
Why are you clacking away like that, my good sir, eh? Have you gone out of your wits in your office? Enough, gentlemen, enough, Zverkov cried authoritatively.
How stupid it is, muttered Semenov.
It really is stupid. We have met here, a company of friends, for a farewell dinner to a comrade, and you carry on an altercation, said Trudolyubov, rudely addressing himself to me alone.
You invited yourself to join us, so don't disturb the general harmony.
Enough, enough, cried Zverkov.
Give over, gentlemen, it's out of place.
Better let me tell you how I nearly got married the day before yesterday.
And then followed a burlesque narrative of how this gentleman had almost been married 2 days before.
There was not a word about the marriage, however, but the story was adorned with generals, colonels, and Kammerjunker, while Zverkov almost took the lead among them.
It was greeted with approving laughter. Furfichkin positively squealed.
No one paid any attention to me, and I sat crushed and humiliated.
Good heavens, these are not the people for me, I thought.
And what a fool I have made of myself before them. I let Furfichkin go too far, though. The brutes imagine they are doing me an honor in letting me sit down with them. They don't understand that it's an honor to them and not to me.
I've grown thinner. My clothes. Oh, damn my trousers.
Zverkov noticed the yellow stain on the knee as soon as he came in.
But what's the use? I must get up at once, this very minute, take my hat and simply go without a word.
With contempt. And tomorrow I can send a challenge.
The scoundrels. As though I cared about the 7 rubles.
They may think. Damn it. I don't care about the 7 rubles.
I'll go this minute. Of course I remained.
I drank sherry and Lafitte by the glassful in my discomfiture.
Being unaccustomed to it, I was quickly affected.
My annoyance increased as the wine went to my head.
I longed all at once to insult them all in a most flagrant manner and then go away.
To seize the moment and show what I could do so that they would say, he's clever though he is absurd, and,
in fact, damn them all.
I scanned them all insolently with my drowsy eyes.
But they seemed to have forgotten me altogether.
They were noisy, vociferous, cheerful.
Zverkov was talking all the time.
I began listening. Zverkov was talking of some exuberant lady whom he had at last led on to declaring her love, of course.
He was lying like a horse, and how he had been helped in this affair by an intimate friend of his, a Prince Kolya, an officer in the Hussars, who had 3,000 serfs.
And yet this Kolya, who has 3,000 serfs, has not put in an appearance here tonight to see you off, I cut in suddenly.
For 1 minute every one was silent.
You are drunk already. Trudolyubov deigned to notice me at last, glancing contemptuously in my direction.
Zverkov, without a word, examined me as though I were an insect.
I dropped my eyes. Simonov made haste to fill up the glasses with champagne.
Trudolyubov raised his glass, as did everyone else but me. Your health and good luck on the journey, he cried to Zverkov.
To old times, to our future, hurrah! They all tossed off their glasses and crowded round Zverkov to kiss him.
I did not move. My full glass stood untouched before me. Why, aren't you going to drink it?
Roared Trudolyubov, losing patience and turning menacingly to me. I want to make a speech separately on my own account. And then I'll drink it, Mr. Trudolyubov.
Spiteful brute, muttered Simonov.
I drew myself up in my chair and feverishly seized my glass, prepared for something extraordinary, though I did not know myself precisely what I was going to say.
Silence, cried Ferfitchkin.
Now for a display of wit. Zverkov waited very gravely, knowing what was coming.
Mr. Lieutenant Zverkov, I began, let me tell you that I hate phrases, phrasemongers and men in corsets. That's the first point, and there is a second one to follow it.
There was a general stir. The second point is, I hate ribaldry and ribald talkers.
Especially ribald talkers. The third point, I love justice, truth, and honesty. I went on almost mechanically, for I was beginning to shiver with horror myself, and had no idea how I came to be talking like this.
I love thought, Monsieur Zverkov. I love true comradeship on an equal footing and not. Ashem.
I love. But, however, why not?
I will drink your health too, Mr. Zverkov.
Seduce the Circassian girls, shoot the enemies of the fatherland,
And, to your health, Monsieur Zverkov.
Zverkov got up from his seat, bowed to me and said, I am very much obliged to you. He was frightfully offended and turned pale.
Damn the fellow, roared Trudolyubov, bringing his fist down on the table.
Well, he wants a punch in the face for that, squealed Ferfitchkin.
We ought to turn him out, muttered Simonov.
Not a word, gentlemen, not a movement, cried Zverkov solemnly, checking the general indignation.
I thank you all, but I can show him for myself how much value I attach to his words. Mr. Ferfitchkin, you will give me satisfaction tomorrow for your words just now, I said aloud, turning with dignity to Ferfitchkin.
A duel, you mean? Certainly, he answered.
But probably I was so ridiculous as I challenged him, and it was so out of keeping with my appearance that everyone, including Ferfitchkin, was prostrate with laughter.
Yes, let him alone, of course. He is quite drunk, Trudolyubov said with disgust.
I shall never forgive myself for letting him join us, Simonov muttered again.
Now is the time to throw a bottle at their heads, I thought to myself.
I picked up the bottle and filled my glass.
No, I'd better sit on to the end, I went on thinking. You would be pleased, my friends, if I went away.
Nothing will induce me to go. I'll go on sitting here and drinking to the end on purpose, as a sign that I don't think you of the slightest consequence.
I will go on sitting and drinking, because this is a public house and I paid my entrance money.
I'll sit here and drink, for I look upon you as so many pawns, as inanimate pawns.
I'll sit here and drink. And sing if I want to, yes, sing, for I have the right to.
To sing. Ashem. But I did not sing.
I simply tried not to look at any of them.
I assumed most unconcerned attitudes and waited with impatience for them to speak first.
But alas, they did not address me.
And oh, how I wished at that moment to be reconciled to them.
It struck 8 at last 9.
They moved from the table to the sofa.
Zverkov stretched himself on a lounge and put one foot on a round table.
Wine was brought there. He did, as a fact, order 3 bottles on his own account.
I, of course, was not invited to join them.
They all sat round him on the sofa.
They listened to him, almost with reverence.
It was evident that they were fond of him.
What for? What for? I wondered.
From time to time they were moved to drunken enthusiasm and kissed each other.
They talked of the Caucasus, of the nature of true passion.
Of snug berths in the service, of the income of an hussar called Podharzhevsky, whom none of them knew personally, and rejoiced in the largeness of it, of the extraordinary grace and beauty of a Princess D whom none of them had ever seen.
Then it came to Shakespeare's being immortal.
I smiled contemptuously and walked up and down the other side of the room, opposite the sofa, from the table to the stove and back again.
I tried my very utmost to show them that I could do without them, and yet I purposely made a noise with my boots, thumping with my heels.
But it was all in vain. They paid no attention.
I had the patience to walk up and down in front of them from 8 o'clock till 11, in the same place, from the table to the stove and back again.
I walk up and down to please myself, and no one can prevent me. The waiter who came into the room stopped, from time to time, to look at me. I was somewhat giddy from turning round so often. At moments it seemed to me that I was in delirium.
During those 3 hours I was 3 times soaked with sweat and dry again.
At times, with an intense, acute pang, I was stabbed to the heart by the thought that 10 years,
20 years, 40 years would pass, and that even in 40 years I would remember with loathing and humiliation those filthiest, most ludicrous, and most awful moments of my life.
no one could have gone out of his way to degrade himself more shamelessly, and I fully realized it, and yet I went on pacing up and down from the table to the stove.
Oh, if you only knew what thoughts and feelings I am capable of, how cultured I am. I thought at moments, mentally addressing the sofa on which my enemies were sitting.
But my enemies behaved as though I were not in the room.
Once, only once, they turned towards me, just when Zverkov was talking about Shakespeare, and I suddenly gave a contemptuous laugh.
I laughed in such an affected and disgusting way that they all at once broke off their conversation, and silently and gravely for 2 minutes watched me walking up and down from the table to the stove, taking no notice of them.
But nothing came of it. They said nothing, and 2 minutes later they ceased to notice me again.
It struck 11. "Friends," cried Zverkov, getting up from the sofa, "let us all be off now there." Of course," the others assented.
I turned sharply to Zverkov. I was so harassed, so exhausted, that I would have cut my throat to put an end to it.
I was in a fever, my hair, soaked with perspiration, stuck to my forehead and temples.
Zverkov, I beg your pardon, I said abruptly and resolutely.
Ferfitchkin, yours too, and everyone's. I have insulted you all.
Aha! A duel is not in your line, old man, Ferfitchkin hissed venomously.
It sent a sharp pang to my heart.
No, it's not the duel I am afraid of, Ferfitchkin.
I am ready to fight you tomorrow, after we are reconciled.
I insist upon it, in fact, and you cannot refuse.
I want to show you that I am not afraid of a duel.
You shall fire first and I shall fire into the air.
He is comforting himself, said Simonov.
He's simply raving, said Tridolyubov.
But let us pass. Why are you barring our way? What do you want? Zverkov answered disdainfully.
They were all flushed, their eyes were bright. They had been drinking heavily.
I ask for your friendship, Zverkov. I insulted you, but... Insulted? You insulted me? Understand, sir, that you never, under any circumstances, could possibly insult me. And that's enough for you.
Out of the way, concluded Tridolyubov.
Olympia is mine, friends, that's agreed.
Cried Zverkov. We won't dispute your right, we won't dispute your right, the others answered, laughing.
I stood as though spat upon. Party went noisily out of the room.
Tridolyubov struck up some stupid song.
Simonov remained behind for a moment to tip the waiters.
I suddenly went up to him. Simonov, give me 6 rubles, I said, with desperate resolution.
He looked at me in extreme amazement, with vacant eyes.
He too was drunk. You don't mean you are coming with us?
Yes. I've no money, he snapped out, and with a scornful laugh he went out of the room.
I clutched at his overcoat. It was a nightmare.
Simonov, I saw you had money.
Why do you refuse me? Am I a scoundrel? Beware of refusing me. If you knew why I am asking. My whole future, my whole plans depend upon it. Simonov pulled out the money and almost flung it at me.
Take it if you have no sense of shame, he pronounced pitilessly and ran to overtake them.
I was left for a moment alone.
Disorder, the remains of dinner.
A broken wine glass on the floor, spilt wine, cigarette ends, fumes of drink and delirium in my brain, an agonizing misery in my heart, and finally the waiter, who had seen and heard all and was looking inquisitively into my face.
I am going there, I cried. Either they shall all go down on their knees to beg for my friendship, or I will give Zverkov a slap in the face.